The conference room went silent. 40 partners, associates, and clients were staring at a screen, at MY name, on MY case file, with a timestamp that proved everything. Marcus Ellison, the man who built his entire reputation on stealing my work, was standing at the front of the room with no idea his career was about to end in the next 4 minutes. I want to tell you exactly how I got there. Because 3 years ago, I was just an associate who was too scared to say a word. My name is Maria Gonzalez, and this is a true story about the 3 years I spent building someone else's career, and the one meeting where I took it all back. I graduated law school with more debt than sense, and like a lot of new associates, I took the first offer I got, a mid-sized commercial litigation firm downtown, working directly under a senior partner named Marcus Ellison. On paper, Marcus was a legend. 20 years in litigation, a corner office, a reputation for winning cases that shouldn't be winnable. Clients loved him. The managing partners loved him. He was the golden name on the letterhead. What nobody outside our floor knew was that Marcus hadn't drafted a real brief in years. That was my job. At first, it felt normal. Senior partners delegate, that's how firms work. I'd research, draft, build the arguments, and Marcus would review, sign off, and argue in court. Standard associate work. I told myself this was just paying my dues, but it wasn't just drafting. It was everything. I built the discovery strategy that won us a 7-figure settlement in my first year. I wrote the motion that got a fraud case dismissed before it ever reached trial. I stayed until 2 a.m. more nights than I can count, rebuilding arguments Marcus had half-baked in a client meeting, because he'd walk in, charm the room, promise the client a strategy, and then hand me a napkin sketch and say, "Make this work, Gonzalez." And I did. Every time. The problem was when the case won, when the client sent the thank you email, when the firm posted about it, when Marcus stood up at the annual dinner to accept Litigator of the Year, my name was nowhere. Not once. I want to be honest with you. For a long time, I didn't see it as stealing. I saw it as the system. Junior associates aren't supposed to get credit. That's what the senior partners are for. I told myself that if I just kept my head down and worked hard enough, eventually it would translate into a partnership track. The first crack in that belief happened in year 2. We landed a major client, a mid-size logistics company being sued for breach of contract, real exposure, real stakes. Marcus assigned it to me to run point on research, which in our firm's language meant, I do the actual case, he takes the meetings. I spent 4 months on that case. I found a clause buried in an old amendment that completely undercut the plaintiff's argument, something none of the senior associates had caught, something Marcus himself hadn't even read closely. I built the entire defense strategy around it. We won. Not settled, won, outright, motion for summary judgment granted. The client was thrilled. They sent a bottle of wine to the office with a card. To the brilliant strategy that saved us, thank you, Marcus. I remember standing in the break room reading that card and feeling something shift in my chest. Not anger yet, just a quiet confusion, because I knew what actually happened in that case. I knew whose name should have been on it. I mentioned it to a colleague carefully, half joking. Funny how that clause thing turned out, right? And she just looked at me and said, "Maria, everyone on this floor knows you write his cases. It's an open secret." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't an oversight. It was a system Marcus had built, and everyone around him had quietly agreed to look the other way, because it was easier than confronting a senior partner who brought in millions in billings. I started paying closer attention after that. I noticed how Marcus would take my memos into client meetings and repeat them almost word for word, presenting them as his own thinking in real time. I noticed how, in partner meetings, he'd reference my strategic approach to a case I'd built from the ground up. I noticed that every associate review cycle, my formal evaluations used words like solid, reliable, good at execution, never strategic, never leadership, never the kind of language that gets you considered for partner. Because if I got credit for strategy, people might start asking whose strategy it actually was. By year 3, I decided to test the water. Carefully. There was a case, a contract dispute for a tech client, where I developed a novel argument based on a recent appellate ruling almost nobody in the firm had flagged yet. It was good. I knew it was good. And for once, I decided I wasn't going to let it disappear into Marcus's name without at least trying. I asked to be listed as co-counsel on the filing. Not lead, just co-counsel. Just acknowledgement that I existed on the case. Marcus's response was smooth, the way it always was. He told me he completely understood where I was coming from, that he valued my work more than I probably realized, and that he'd absolutely keep it in mind for the next case. Then he told me that right now, with the client relationship being so sensitive, it was better optics for the filing to come from a senior partner only. I let it go. Because what was I going to do, go to HR and say my boss won't put my name on a legal filing? That's not a policy violation. That's just how law firms work, technically. There's no rule that says an associate has to be named. It's all discretionary, which is exactly why it works so well as a system. There's nothing to point to. But I started keeping records. Not out of some master plan yet, just instinct. I started saving drafts with timestamps. I started CCing myself on internal case emails. I started keeping a private folder, nothing dramatic, just organized, of every memo, every brief, every strategy document I'd authored, with dates, so that if I ever needed to prove what I'd actually done, I could. I told myself it was just for my own peace of mind. In hindsight, I think some part of me already knew I was building a case. The partnership decisions came out in March. I'd been at the firm 3.5 years, right around the timeline when strong associates start getting seriously considered for junior partner tracks. I'd billed more hours than almost anyone on our floor. I'd been the uncredited engine behind at least 6 major wins. I walked into that review with what I thought was a reasonable case for myself. Marcus sat across from me in his office, the office I'd basically furnished with my own work, and told me, with what I can only describe as rehearsed sincerity, that the partnership committee felt I wasn't quite ready to lead client relationships independently. That I was an incredible executor, but that partnership required strategic vision and origination, and that maybe next cycle, if I worked on stepping into more of a leadership presence, things could look different. I sat there and listened to a man describe the exact skill set I had been using to build his career for 3 years, strategic vision, origination, leadership, and tell me I didn't have it. I didn't say anything in that meeting. I thanked him for the feedback. I walked back to my office, closed the door, and sat there for a long time. And then something in me went very, very calm. Not sad calm, clear calm. The kind of calm where you stop hopping the system will eventually notice you, and you start deciding you're going to make it notice you. I thought about every case file in my private folder, every time-stamped draft, every email where I'd been CC'd, buried, or quietly cut out of the credit line. And I realized I didn't need Marcus to give me anything. I already had everything I needed. I just hadn't decided to use it yet. Over the next 6 weeks, I did something I want to be very clear about. I didn't fabricate a single thing. I didn't leak client confidential information. I didn't do anything that would put my license at risk. Everything I gathered was material I had legitimately authored on firm systems with a documented timestamp trail, plus internal emails that were already part of the normal record. I organized it by case. For each of the 6 major wins over 3 years, I built a simple, undeniable comparison. The original draft I wrote, timestamped, versus the final version Marcus presented to the client or the court, nearly identical, sometimes literally unchanged except for his signature block. I also pulled the associate review language from my own file and quietly requested, through a completely normal HR process available to any associate, my own billing and hours records for the same period, cross-referenced against the case files. The numbers told their own story. I had logged more hours, on more of the substantive legal work, on every single one of those 6 cases than Marcus had. Here's the thing about a firm like ours. Reputation is the entire currency. Marcus's value to the partnership wasn't just that he won cases. It was that he was seen as the strategic mind behind those wins. If that perception cracked, publicly, in front of the people who mattered, the other partners, the clients in the room, the firm's own culture of meritocracy that they loved to talk about at recruiting events, there would be no smooth talking his way out of it. I didn't want him fired through some quiet HR complaint that could get buried. I wanted the truth to exist somewhere he couldn't spin it. So I waited for the right moment. And the right moment came in the form of the firm's quarterly all-partner meeting, the same meeting where, Every quarter, senior partners presented their case of the quarter to showcase strategic wins to the entire partnership, and a handful of major clients invited to observe. Marcus had already told me, almost proudly, that he was presenting the tech contract case. My case. The one with the appellate argument he'd blocked me from getting credit on. I requested 5 minutes on the agenda as supporting case counsel, a completely normal and boring-sounding request that nobody questions. Marcus, confident as ever, didn't think twice about it. He probably assumed I'd stand there nodding while he took the credit one more time. The room was full. 40-some partners and associates, plus 2 client representatives from the tech company sitting near the front, the same client whose case this was. Marcus got up first, exactly as expected. He walked through his strategic approach, referencing the appellate ruling as though he'd found it himself, describing his reasoning for the argument structure. Confident. Smooth. The same performance I'd watched 100 times. Then he introduced me, and I'll let Maria fill in a few of the supporting details. Already turning to sit down, already treating my 5 minutes as a formality. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him of anything in the first 30 seconds. I simply said I wanted to share the timeline of how the strategy actually developed, for anyone interested in the research process behind a case like this. And then I put the first slide up. My original memo, timestamped 6 weeks before Marcus's first client meeting on the case, the memo containing the exact appellate argument, in my own drafting, in my own words. Then the second slide, the final brief Marcus had submitted, side by side with my draft, nearly identical. Same structure, same citations, same sentence in 3 places, word for word. I said calmly, I wanted to walk through this because I think it's a great example of how research and strategy actually move through this firm, and I think it's worth being transparent about whose work product this represents, especially in front of our client. You could hear the room change temperature. I pulled up the billing summary next, not accusatory, just factual. Hours logged, by task, by attorney, across the 6 major cases over 3 years. My name appearing, case after case, as the substantive driver of the legal work, while the credit in every external communication, every award, every client thank you note, had gone to Marcus alone. I didn't call him a liar. I didn't need to. I just said, I think it's important, especially as this firm talks about mentorship and advancement for associates, that the actual authorship of our work is something we're honest about with each other and with our clients. Then I looked at the client representatives and said, and I want you to know the strategy that won your case, the one Marcus just walked you through, that was mine. I'm glad it worked for you. I just think you deserve to know who actually built it. Marcus tried to interject, something about context and team effort, but the client rep, a sharp woman named Alina who'd clearly been paying close attention, cut in first. Wait, this associate wrote the actual argument that won our case, and her name isn't on any of the paperwork we received. That question did more damage in 5 seconds than anything I could have said in 5 minutes. Managing partner, a woman named Diane who I'd barely interacted with before that day, sat forward and asked to see the timestamp documentation after the meeting. I said I'd be happy to provide it, all of it. Marcus's face had gone a color I'd never seen on him before. 20 years of built reputation, and in one meeting in front of the exact audience whose respect he'd spent his career curating, the foundation cracked in real time. I sat back down. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just let the silence do what 3 years of quiet, careful documentation had built it to do. Within a week, the firm opened an internal review, not of me, of Marcus, and of the firm's attribution practices more broadly. Turns out I wasn't the only associate who'd quietly been absorbed into someone else's reputation. Once the door opened, 2 other associates came forward with similar stories about different partners. Marcus didn't get fired immediately. Firms move slowly, and 20 years of billings buys you some cushion, but his standing changed permanently. He was moved off origination credit for future client relationships. 2 major clients, including Alina's company, specifically requested I be listed as lead counsel going forward. Within 4 months, I was offered the partnership track that had been not quite ready for me 3.5 years earlier. I didn't do it for revenge, not really, or at least, not only for that. I did it because I was tired of being the invisible engine behind someone else's name. And I learned something in the process that I think matters more than the story itself. The people who take credit for your work are counting on you staying quiet, staying grateful, staying reliable instead of strategic. The moment you start keeping the receipts, literally, in my case, the power in that relationship starts to shift. I'm Maria Gonzalez, and this has been Revenge Diaries. If you've ever had someone try to take credit for your work, I want to hear about it in the comments. And if you liked this one, the next story might be even messier.